The surface of Earth feels stable when you stand on it, solid, predictable, ancient, but almost everything about life here is quietly moving. The ground beneath you drifts slowly across the planet at the speed your fingernails grow. The air around you is filled with microscopic travelers. Trees communicate through underground fungal networks. Entire oceans pulse with invisible migrations every night, while most humans are asleep. And somehow, inside all of this motion, your mind still experiences something called home. Tonight, for a little while, you can simply observe the strange calmness of life on Earth. Not the dramatic version of Earth you often see in documentaries, not disasters or survival stories, just the softer reality, the quiet systems, the slow rhythms, the patterns that continue whether anyone notices them or not. Because life on Earth is not built from sudden moments. It is built from repetition, from tides returning to the same shores for millions of years, from forests breathing in long chemical cycles, from tiny organisms recycling the planet grain by grain, from your own body replacing old cells while you sleep. And when you look closely enough, Earth begins to feel less like a place you live on and more like a living process you temporarily belong to. The oldest living organisms on Earth are far older than human civilization. Some trees alive today were already ancient when the pyramids were still new. In the mountains of western North America, there are bristlecone pine trees that have survived for nearly 5,000 years. Their trunks twist slowly under harsh winds, their bark hardens against cold air. Their growth is so slow that time itself almost seems visible inside them. Year after year, they add only thin layers of wood. Very little changes quickly for them. A human life, to a tree like this, would pass almost as fast as a season, and yet the tree does not rush. It survives through patience. This is one of the quiet patterns repeated throughout nature. Life on Earth often succeeds not through speed, but through consistency. Coral reefs grow millimeter by millimeter. Mountains erode grain by grain. Forests return after fire through tiny, unnoticed sprouts. Even evolution itself works through extremely small changes repeated across unimaginable spans of time. Human minds are not naturally built to think on these scales. Your brain evolved to notice immediate danger, immediate reward, immediate movement, but Earth moves differently. Earth specializes in slowness. The Amazon rainforest, for example, creates part of its own weather. Trees release water vapor through their leaves in a process called transpiration. Billions of leaves together form invisible rivers in the sky. These moisture currents help generate rainfall patterns across entire continents. A forest, in a sense, partially creates the rain that keeps the forest alive. There is something deeply calming about systems like this, not because they are simple, but because they are interconnected so completely that the boundaries between cause and effect begin to blur. On Earth, life constantly shapes the environment that shapes life in return. The oxygen you breathe exists largely because ancient microorganisms transformed Earth's atmosphere billions of years ago. Before them, the planet was almost unrecognizable. The sky itself changed because tiny organisms slowly altered the chemistry of the world. And even now, every breath you take participates in cycles older than humanity. Some of the oxygen entering your lungs tonight may have passed through forests, oceans, moss, algae, or countless other living things before reaching you. Atoms travel continuously through Earth's systems. The calcium in your bones may once have been dissolved in ancient seas. The iron in your blood was forged inside exploding stars long before Earth existed. You are physically connected to events so old that ordinary language struggles to describe them. And yet your experience of life feels immediate. Warm blankets, a quiet room, a heartbeat. The human mind lives in moments, but the materials that built you belong to cosmic timelines. There is a strange comfort in that contrast, especially at night, because nighttime naturally softens the illusion that humans exist separately from the rest of Earth. During the day, modern life creates distance from natural rhythms. Artificial light stretches time. Screens compete for attention. Clocks divide experience into schedules and deadlines. But late at night, something changes. The world becomes slower again. You begin noticing quieter things. The distant sound of wind, the hum of electricity, the settling of buildings. And underneath all of it, Earth continues its silent movement through space. Right now, the planet is rotating at roughly 1,000 miles per hour near the equator. At the same time, Earth travels around the Sun at about 67,000 miles per hour. Yet you do not feel motion. Your nervous system interprets stability inside enormous movement. That is one of the most fascinating abilities of the brain. It filters reality into something manageable. If humans consciously sensed every motion, every sound, every biological process at once, the experience would be overwhelming. So the brain edits the world continuously. It selects, it simplifies, it creates a usable version of reality. And sometimes, during quiet moments before sleep, you become slightly aware of how much is normally filtered out. For example, your body is performing thousands of tasks right now without asking for your attention. Your liver processes chemicals. Your immune system scans for threats. Cells divide. Proteins fold into precise shapes. Neurons exchange electrical signals across vast networks. The average human brain contains around 86 billion neurons. Each one forms connections with thousands of others. Inside your skull exists an electrical forest more complex than any technology humans have ever built. And despite all this activity, consciousness itself remains partly mysterious. Science still cannot fully explain why awareness feels the way it does, why thoughts have texture, why memories carry emotion, why certain sounds feel comforting at night. The deeper scientists study life, the more they often discover layers of complexity hidden beneath ordinary experience. Take sleep itself. For a long time, humans assumed sleep was simply a period of inactivity, but the sleeping brain is extraordinarily active. During sleep, memories reorganize. Emotional experiences become processed differently. Cerebrospinal fluid moves through brain tissue in rhythmic pulses, helping clear metabolic waste. Your brain, in some ways, cleans itself while you dream. Dreams themselves remain partly mysterious too. Some theories suggest dreams help simulate possible situations. Others propose they help process emotions or strengthen memory networks. But regardless of their exact purpose, dreams reveal something important about the human mind. Even in rest, the brain continues creating worlds, and Earth is filled with creatures that experience entirely different versions of reality than humans do. Bees can detect ultraviolet patterns on flowers invisible to human eyes. Birds navigate using Earth's magnetic field. Whales communicate across immense ocean distances through low-frequency sound. To a whale, the ocean may feel partially acoustic, shaped through echoes and vibrations rather than sight alone. To migratory birds, magnetic fields may form invisible maps layered over landscapes. Every species lives inside its own interpretation of Earth. Humans sometimes forget this. It is easy to assume the world appears objectively the way you perceive it, but perception is always partial. A forest at night, for example, may seem silent to humans, yet many nocturnal creatures experience it as intensely active. Tiny insects communicate chemically. Owls track movement through microscopic sound differences. Fungi exchange nutrients underground through enormous living networks. Beneath the soil of forests exists what some scientists informally call the wood wide web. Mycorrhizal fungi connect plant roots across large areas, allowing nutrients and chemical signals to move between trees. Older trees can sometimes support younger ones through these underground systems. Forests, in a sense, behave less like collections of separate individuals and more like interconnected communities. Life on Earth repeatedly moves toward networks, coral reefs, and colonies. Human cities, neural systems, root systems. Complexity often emerges through connection, and connection itself creates stability. This pattern appears even in the oceans. Every night, one of the largest migrations on Earth quietly occurs beneath the surface of the sea. Billions of small marine organisms rise upward from dark, deep waters toward the surface to feed, then descend again before daylight. Most humans never witness this, but it happens continuously, a planetary rhythm hidden underwater. The ocean contains countless examples like this. Deep beneath the surface, where sunlight never reaches, entire ecosystems survive around hydrothermal vents. Instead of relying on solar energy, Certain organisms use chemical energy from Earth's interior. Life adapts in astonishing ways. In Antarctica, microscopic organisms survive inside ice. In deserts, seeds can remain dormant for years waiting for rain. Tardigrades, tiny microscopic animals, can endure extreme radiation, freezing, even the vacuum of space for limited periods. Life does not merely exist on Earth, it explores possibility. Over billions of years, evolution has tested countless forms, strategies, structures, and behaviors. Most disappeared, a few continued, and eventually, one species evolved capable of wondering about the process itself. Humans are made from Earth, becoming aware of Earth. That idea can feel strangely peaceful because it places human consciousness back inside nature rather than outside it. Your thoughts are not separate from the planet. They are products of it. The same physical laws shaping rivers and storms also shape neural activity inside the brain. Electricity moves through clouds and nervous systems alike. Patterns repeat across scales. Even your heartbeat reflects ancient biological rhythms inherited through millions of years of evolution. And your emotional systems were shaped by environments very different from modern life. The human brain evolved in small groups, surrounded by natural cycles of light, weather, sound, and season. Some researchers believe this may partly explain why natural environments often feel calming to humans today. Forests contain visual patterns called fractals, repeating structures that appear similar across different scales. Coastlines, clouds, leaves, and river systems all contain fractal geometry. Studies suggest human brains may process these patterns efficiently and comfortably. Nature, in some ways, matches the architecture of the mind. Not perfectly. Nature can also be violent, indifferent, unpredictable. But alongside danger, there is rhythm, and rhythm affects the nervous system deeply. Ocean waves, rainfall, wind through trees. These sounds contain soft variations that are neither fully random nor fully repetitive. The brain seems to rest comfortably inside patterns like these, perhaps because Earth itself operates through layered rhythms: day and night, tides and moons, seasons and migrations, sleeping and waking. Even your body temperature rises and falls predictably over 24 hours. You are synchronized with planetary cycles, whether you think about them or not. And maybe that is part of what makes nighttime reflection feel so different from daytime thinking. At night, human identity becomes quieter. The world stops demanding performance for a few hours, and beneath social roles, schedules, and responsibilities, you remain what you have always been, a living organism on a moving planet, breathing borrowed oxygen, using ancient atoms, participating in biological cycles older than memory. There is no need to force meaning onto that. The fact itself is already profound enough. Somewhere tonight, rain is falling into oceans. Somewhere glaciers are slowly shifting. Somewhere seeds are opening underground in darkness. Somewhere whales are crossing deep water guided by instincts millions of years old. And here you are, listening quietly while Earth continues its endless activity around you, not demanding your attention, simply continuing. Perhaps that is one of the most relaxing truths about life on Earth. So much of it functions without human control. Forests grow, clouds form, cells repair themselves, stars appear overhead. The planet does not pause waiting for certainty. It moves through cycles, and life, despite all its complexity, is often built from very simple repetitions sustained over time. A heartbeat, a breath, a season, a tide, again and again. Long after individual moments disappear, long after individual people disappear, Earth continues carrying life forward through quiet persistence. And tonight, for a brief moment, you are part of that continuity. Not separate from it, inside it, a temporary awareness, moving through an ancient living world. And as the night grows softer around you, the planet continues turning silently beneath the dark sky, steady, ancient, and unbelievably alive, far beneath the surface of the ocean, where sunlight disappears completely. Pressure becomes almost impossible to imagine. At the deepest parts of Earth's oceans, the weight of water above is so immense that it would crush most living things instantly. And yet life still exists there. Transparent creatures drift through darkness, carrying their own faint light. Slow-moving organisms survive near cracks in Earth's crust, where superheated water rises from below. Some fish have bodies so delicate and soft that bringing them too quickly toward the surface causes them to collapse under changing pressure. The deep ocean reminds you that life on Earth does not only survive in comfortable places, it adapts to extremes quietly, without complaint, without drama. For most of human history, the deep sea remained completely unknown. Entire ecosystems existed beyond human awareness. Creatures moved through darkness for millions of years without ever being seen. There is something calming about that idea. The world has always been larger than human attention. Even now, scientists estimate that most species on Earth may still be undiscovered. Insects hidden in rainforests, microorganisms beneath ice, deep-sea life forms drifting far below ordinary observation. Earth is still partially mysterious, and perhaps mystery itself has a calming effect on the mind. Not all mysteries need immediate answers. Some can simply exist beside you quietly. The night sky often creates this feeling too. When humans look upward into space, the brain instinctively tries to organize what it sees. Constellations become shapes. Random stars become stories. Ancient civilizations connected points of light into hunters, animals, rivers, gods. The human mind naturally searches for patterns, but the universe itself is mostly empty space. Between stars lie enormous distances so large they almost resist emotional understanding. And yet Earth feels intimate. Warm oceans, wet soil, breathing forests. Compared to the cold silence of space, Earth is astonishingly alive. Scientists sometimes describe Earth as a very thin layer of life wrapped around rock. If the planet were the size of an apple, most life would exist in a skin thinner than the apple's surface layer. Everything humans have ever known exists inside this fragile zone. Birdsong, cities, dreams, music, memory. A narrow region where conditions happened to become suitable for biology, and biology immediately began experimenting. One of the most fascinating things about life is how strongly it prefers cooperation alongside competition. Popular culture often describes evolution as endless conflict. But nature is filled with partnership. Lichens are collaborations between fungi and algae. Your own body depends on trillions of microorganisms living inside you. Flowering plants and pollinating insects evolved together across millions of years. Even human survival has always depended heavily on cooperation. Language itself is cooperative. Culture is cooperative. Knowledge moves between generations through shared memory. No single human could independently recreate modern civilization from nothing. Life on Earth advances collectively, and perhaps this explains why loneliness affects humans so deeply. The nervous system evolved expecting connection, not constant stimulation, not endless information. Connection. In quiet moments, many people instinctively seek reminders that they belong to something larger than themselves. Sometimes they find it through relationships, sometimes through religion, sometimes through science, sometimes simply by sitting outside under trees at night. Because nature has a way of reducing psychological noise. A forest does not care about status. An ocean does not measure productivity. Rain does not ask who you are before falling. Natural systems operate without judgment, and this can feel unexpectedly peaceful to a tired mind, especially in modern life, where human attention is constantly divided. The average person today encounters more information in a single day than people centuries ago may have experienced in weeks. Your brain continuously filters notifications, advertisements, conversations, decisions, headlines, schedules, but Earth's older rhythms remain slower. Sunrise still arrives gradually. Moss still grows silently. Moonlight still reflects across water the same way it did thousands of years ago. Some things have not accelerated, and human biology still responds to those slower patterns. Researchers studying stress often find that exposure to natural environments can lower heart rate, reduce cortisol levels, and calm certain forms of mental fatigue. Not because nature magically removes problems, but because it shifts attention differently. Natural environments tend to engage what psychologists sometimes call soft fascination. Your attention rests gently on movement and texture without becoming overloaded. Leaves moving in wind, clouds drifting slowly, water repeating familiar motions. The brain can observe these patterns without strain. Perhaps this is why campfires feel hypnotic too. Humans have likely watched fire for hundreds of thousands of years. Flickering light occupies attention softly. Flames never repeat exactly, yet they remain predictable enough to feel safe. Ancient nervous systems still recognize these experiences, and in many ways, sleep itself is ancient. Almost every complex animal sleeps in some form. Mammals sleep, birds sleep, reptiles experience rest cycles. Even simple organisms display rhythmic periods resembling recovery states. Sleep appears so important that evolution preserved it despite vulnerability. A sleeping animal cannot fully defend itself. It cannot gather food efficiently. It becomes less aware of danger, and yet life retained sleep across millions of years, which suggests its benefits must be enormous. Without sleep, memory weakens. Emotional regulation becomes unstable. The immune system suffers. Perception distorts. The brain requires periods of withdrawal from constant external input, and perhaps human beings require something similar psychologically too. Moments without performance, without urgency, without constant reaction. Modern culture often treats stillness as unproductive, but many of Earth's most important processes happen slowly and invisibly. Roots grow underground before branches appear. Continents drift too slowly for direct perception. Healing inside the body often occurs during rest. Quiet processes sustain visible life. Even silence itself is rarely truly silent. In forests, sensitive microphones reveal enormous acoustic complexity hidden beneath ordinary hearing. Tiny vibrations move through soil. Plants produce microscopic crackling sounds during water transport. Insects generate layered frequencies too subtle for conscious attention. Earth is constantly communicating through signals humans barely notice. The same is true inside your body. Your ears hear only a narrow range of sound frequencies. Your eyes detect only a small portion of the electromagnetic spectrum. Reality is vastly richer than perception allows, and strangely, this limitation may protect peace of mind. Imagine sensing everything simultaneously. Every radio wave, every vibration, every chemical exchange. The world would become overwhelming almost instantly. So consciousness narrows experience into manageable streams. It gives you a simplified version of existence, enough to navigate, enough to connect, enough to survive. And tonight, perhaps enough simply to observe quietly. The earth beneath human civilization remains ancient beyond comprehension. Beneath roads and buildings lie older landscapes. Beneath those landscapes lie compressed oceans, volcanic rock, fossils from vanished ecosystems. Entire worlds existed before humanity arrived. Ancient forests once covered regions now occupied by deserts. Seas once stretched across areas now filled with mountains. Earth continuously reshapes itself. Nothing stays fixed forever. But change on Earth is often gradual enough that life adapts alongside it. This gradualism appears everywhere. A child slowly becoming an adult, a coastline shifting over centuries, a language evolving across generations. Life rarely transforms all at once. Instead, it moves through accumulation, tiny moments adding quietly together until eventually something new exists. And maybe that is one of the gentlest truths hidden inside Earth's history. Almost everything meaningful grows slowly. Forests, trust, knowledge, memory, healing, not instantly, but gradually, with time slowly layering itself into form. And Earth is, in many ways, the master of layered time. You can see this most clearly in stone. Rock is often thought of as lifeless, static, unchanging. But stone is actually a record of movement stretched so thin it becomes stillness. Mountains are not permanent objects. They are temporary shapes in a slow conversation between pressure, heat, erosion, and gravity. Even the ground beneath your feet is in motion, shaped by forces that began billions of years ago. Some rocks began as sand on ancient beaches. Some were once molten lava flowing like rivers of fire. Some were compressed ocean floors lifted upward by shifting plates. Geology is Earth remembering itself in layers, and those layers move so slowly that human perception cannot detect them directly. A single mountain range can take tens of millions of years to rise. To a human mind, that is almost indistinguishable from forever. But to Earth, it is ordinary timing. This difference in scale creates a quiet perspective shift. What feels permanent in human life is often temporary in planetary time, and what feels small or insignificant may actually be part of very large processes unfolding quietly in the background. Even weather follows this layered structure. A storm you experience lasts hours or days, but the system that produced it is part of cycles that span oceans, seasons, and atmospheric patterns stretching across the entire planet. Water evaporates from oceans. It rises into the air. It cools, condenses, and returns as rain. Then it flows through rivers back into the sea. The same molecules of water have been cycling through Earth for billions of years. The rain falling outside tonight may contain atoms that once passed through ancient forests, prehistoric lakes, or long-vanished seas. Nothing in the water is new, only its arrangement is temporary. This is one of Earth's quietest truths. Almost everything here is recycled. Atoms are reused endlessly across time. Your body is part of that recycling system too. The calcium in your bones will one day return to soil. The carbon in your breath will become part of plants, oceans, or air again. Even the nitrogen in your tissues has passed through countless living forms before you existed. Life does not create matter. It rearranges what already exists. And this rearrangement is continuous, always flowing, always changing shape, yet never truly disappearing. This continuity gives Earth a sense of deep stability beneath all visible change. Even extinction does not erase life's influence. When species disappear, their biological contributions remain in the environment. Their genetic experiments become part of Earth's history, and over time, new forms emerge. Different, adapted, unpredictable, but always built from the same fundamental materials: carbon, water, energy, time. If you zoom out far enough, Earth begins to resemble a vast experiment in pattern formation, life testing possibilities, physics guiding structure, chemistry shaping interaction, and time allowing everything to unfold. Human consciousness exists within the most recent layer of this unfolding, a very thin layer, but intensely aware of itself. There is something unusual about awareness. It does not take up physical space in the same way a rock or tree does, yet it changes how the world is experienced. A forest without observers still grows, still breathes, still cycles nutrients, but a forest observed by a conscious mind becomes something else entirely in experience. It becomes meaningful. This meaning is not required for the forest to exist, but it is a property that emerges when life becomes aware of life. Science still does not fully explain how subjective experience arises from physical processes: neurons firing, electrochemical gradients shifting, networks of cells interacting, and yet somehow these processes produce the feeling of being here, of noticing, of existing in a continuous present moment. That present moment is always slightly unstable. It shifts forward endlessly, never staying still long enough to be held, which is why memory becomes so important. Memory allows continuity across time. Without it, each moment would be isolated, disconnected from what came before. In a sense, memory is what allows identity to feel continuous, but even memory is not fixed. It changes slightly each time it is accessed, reconstructed rather than replayed. This means that human experience is always gently in motion, even inwardly, even in silence. And yet, despite all of this movement, there are still stable rhythms that anchor life. Breathing is one of them. Inhale, exhale, over and over again, without instruction, without conscious effort most of the time. Breathing links the body to the environment in a continuous exchange. Air enters, oxygen is absorbed, carbon dioxide is released. You are constantly interacting with the atmosphere of Earth in a cycle that mirrors the planet's own larger breathing patterns through forests and oceans. At a planetary scale, Earth also breathes in a way. Seasonal changes in vegetation shift atmospheric composition slightly. Oceans absorb and release gases. Forests expand and contract with climate cycles. Life and atmosphere are deeply intertwined systems, not separate, not independent, but co-evolving. And this co-evolution extends far back in time. Billions of years ago, Earth's atmosphere was not breathable for humans. It contained little oxygen. Then microorganisms began producing oxygen through photosynthesis. Over vast stretches of time, This changed the entire planet. The sky itself was transformed by microscopic life. Something so small that it cannot be seen individually reshaped something so large it surrounds everything. This is one of Earth's recurring patterns, small processes accumulating into planetary change, slow actions becoming global transformation. And still, today, similar processes continue. Forests regulate climate, plankton influence atmospheric chemistry, soil microbes affect carbon cycles. Life is not just on Earth. Life actively participates in shaping Earth. That idea carries a quiet depth to it, because it means the planet is not a passive stage where life happens. It is an active system that life continuously modifies and responds to, a feedback loop stretching across billions of years, and within that loop, individual human lives are brief, but not disconnected. Each life participates in ongoing cycles of matter, energy, and information. Even thoughts, as fleeting as they seem, arise from physical processes shaped by evolution and environment. Your awareness tonight is part of that continuity, a small expression of a much larger system observing itself. And as the night grows deeper, it becomes easier to sense how gentle Earth actually is in its long-term processes. Even what humans call catastrophe, volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, climate shifts, are part of Earth's way of balancing energy across time, not gentle in immediate experience, but part of a broader equilibrium that spans geological scales. Most of Earth's functioning does not aim towards speed or efficiency. It follows equilibrium, balance, redistribution, and life has learned to exist within that structure, adapting, adjusting, continuing. So when everything quiets at night and human activity softens, what remains is this long background presence of Earth itself, turning, circulating, evolving without urgency. And you, in this moment, are not outside of it. You are one of its temporary expressions, a brief concentration of awareness shaped by ancient processes, breathing the same air that has passed through countless living systems, resting on a surface shaped by deep time, held gently within a planet that has been continuously transforming for billions of years. And even as thoughts begin to slow, Earth continues its steady motion beneath you, not rushing, not pausing, just continuing, as it always has, and as it likely always will in ways far beyond a single human lifetime. And in that continuity, one of the most quietly remarkable features of Earth becomes more noticeable: resilience. Not the loud kind of resilience that comes from force or resistance, but the slow kind, the kind that rebuilds without announcement. After forest fires, soil often becomes richer rather than poorer. Some seeds only open after intense heat. Certain ecosystems depend on periodic disruption to renew themselves. Even destruction in Earth's systems often becomes a form of preparation. Not immediately, not visibly, but over time, life returns. Grass first, then shrubs, then trees, then entire forests again. This pattern has repeated countless times across Earth's history. Ice ages come and go. Volcanic winters reshape skies. Mass extinctions reset ecological systems. And still, life continues, not as the same exact forms, but as persistence itself expressed in different shapes. There is a quiet lesson embedded in this. Life on Earth does not require perfection to continue. It requires adaptability, flexibility, time. Even the human body reflects this principle. When you are injured, healing does not restore you instantly to a previous state. Instead, the body reconstructs tissue carefully, layer by layer, sometimes with slight differences. A scar is not a return to what was. It is a record of repair, a mark of continuity through disruption. And yet, the body rarely treats healing as dramatic. It simply begins, without ceremony, without attention. Cells divide, proteins gather, inflammation rises and fades. Life quietly fixes itself from within. This self-repair is one of Earth's most consistent features. From ecosystems to organisms, restoration is built into the system. Even oceans show signs of self-regulation over time. They absorb heat, redistribute currents, and support vast biochemical cycles that stabilize planetary conditions. Coral reefs, despite their fragility, create entire underwater cities that support thousands of species. These reefs are built slowly, layer upon layer of calcium carbonate, created by tiny organisms that live briefly but contribute to structures that last for centuries. Small lives building long-lasting architecture. This pattern repeats everywhere. Ant colonies construct intricate underground systems. Beavers reshape waterways into wetlands. Fungi create vast hidden networks beneath forests. Life does not only exist in isolation, it builds environments, and those environments then shape future life. This feedback between organism and habitat is one of Earth's most defining characteristics, a continuous exchange. Inside this exchange, even time itself feels different depending on where you look. For a human, a year can feel significant. For a tree, a year may be a fraction of a growth cycle. For a geological formation, a year is almost invisible. Time is not experienced equally across Earth's systems. It stretches differently depending on scale. Microorganisms reproduce in minutes. Trees evolve across centuries. Continents shift across millions of years. And yet all of these timelines exist simultaneously on the same planet. Layered time. Interacting time, overlapping rhythms. This layered structure creates a kind of hidden harmony, not musical harmony, but structural harmony. Different speeds coexisting without conflict. The fast does not cancel the slow. The slow does not block the fast. They simply operate on different levels. Even human society participates in this layering. Technology moves quickly. Culture evolves more slowly. Language shifts gradually across generations. Geography changes almost imperceptibly. And beneath all of it, biological rhythms remain ancient and steady. Heartbeats, sleep cycles, hormonal patterns, circadian alignment with light and dark. Your body still listens to the sun. Even when screens and artificial lights attempt to redefine day and night, internal systems continue responding to natural cycles. Melatonin rises when darkness increases. Alertness changes with light exposure. Temperature fluctuates subtly through the day. You are still, in many ways, a solar-dependent organism, a creature shaped by planetary rotation. And this rotation is one of Earth's most consistent rhythms. Every 24 hours, the planet turns once on its axis, creating day and night, light and shadow, activity and rest. Across billions of years, this cycle has remained steady enough for life to synchronize itself to it. That synchronization runs so deep that even isolated biological systems removed from external light cues still tend to maintain roughly daily rhythms, as if the body carries an internal memory of Earth's rotation. This connection between biology and planetary motion creates a subtle sense of alignment between human life and Earth itself. Not conscious alignment, but embedded alignment, a quiet agreement between organism and planet. And in the stillness of night, this alignment becomes easier to notice. When external stimulation decreases, internal rhythms become more apparent. Heartbeat, breathing, subtle shifts of awareness. The mind no longer has to track external complexity at full intensity, so attention begins to drift inward slightly, not into thinking, but into noticing. And what is noticed is often very simple: the feeling of air moving, the weight of the body resting, the soft boundary between wakefulness and sleep. This boundary is not a sharp line. It is gradual, like dusk, like dawn. Like most transitions on Earth, nothing in nature changes instantly. Even sunrise is slow when observed carefully. Light does not suddenly appear. It spreads, it deepens, it gradually reshapes the environment. Colors shift from gray to blue to gold. Shadows shorten. Temperature rises slightly. Birds begin to move. A new phase of Earth begins without interruption. And nighttime is simply the opposite transition, a soft fading rather than an arrival. Light withdraws. Temperatures cool. Activity decreases. Sounds become more distant. The planet enters a quieter state, but it never becomes inactive. Even at night, oceans circulate heat. Clouds form and dissolve. Wind patterns continue across continents. Biological systems remain awake in their own ways. Earth does not sleep in the way humans do. It cycles continuously, without stopping. And within that cycling, Life has found countless ways to exist in harmony with different phases. Some creatures are active only in darkness, others only in daylight. Some adapt to seasonal changes, others respond to tides or lunar cycles. Life distributes itself across time as well as space, as if filling every available rhythm. This distribution creates balance. No single moment holds all activity. It is shared across hours, days, seasons, and years. And from this distribution emerges stability, not stillness, but structured movement, like a slow breathing system spread across an entire planet. Inhale, exhale, not in a single place, but across Earth as a whole. Forests taking in carbon dioxide, oceans releasing gases, atmosphere circulating heat, life transforming energy continuously. Everything participating in exchange, nothing truly isolated. Even you, in this moment, are part of that exchange, breathing in oxygen that has circulated through countless living systems, releasing carbon that will become part of future cycles, receiving energy indirectly from ancient sunlight stored in food chains, existing briefly inside a flow that never stops. And as awareness begins to soften again, it becomes easier to sense how unforced all of this is. No urgency is required for Earth to continue. No instruction is needed for cycles to proceed. They simply unfold again and again and again, long after individual moments fade, long after individual thoughts dissolve. The planet continues its quiet, layered movement through time, steady, continuous, and deeply alive. And in that continuity, there is another subtle layer of Earth that often goes unnoticed. Sound, not the obvious sounds of cities or storms, but the constant background acoustic presence of the planet itself. If you could listen to Earth on a large scale, beyond human hearing, you would find that the planet is never truly silent. Oceans generate deep, low-frequency vibrations as waves travel across vast distances. Winds moving over mountain ranges create subtle pressure shifts in the atmosphere. Ice sheets creak and shift in slow, almost imperceptible motion. Even the ground itself carries faint seismic hums caused by constant geological activity. Earth has a kind of steady, acoustic texture, a low, continuous presence, not a single sound, but a field of sound. And within that field, every living thing adds its own layer. Insects produce rhythmic patterns. Birds create dawn and dusk choruses. Mammals communicate across distances with frequency ranges adapted to their environments. Even plants, in their own indirect way, influence soundscapes by shaping wind flow and habitat structure. The result is not chaos. It is structured complexity, a kind of planetary chorus that never fully repeats but never fully disappears either. Humans, for the most part, only perceive a small slice of this acoustic world. But even that limited perception shapes emotional experience deeply. Certain sounds feel calming not because of meaning, but because of pattern, slow repetition, soft variation, predictable irregularity. Rain is one of the clearest examples. Rain is not random. Each drop is unpredictable on its own, but together they form a consistent rhythm. White noise, gentle fluctuation, a continuous unfolding without sharp edges. The brain often relaxes in response to this kind of sound because it does not require interpretation. It simply exists. Much of Earth behaves in a similar way when observed closely. Clouds forming do not follow a strict visual script, yet they maintain recognizable shapes. Waves breaking are never identical, yet always familiar. Forests grow in patterns that are both structured and flexible at once. This balance between order and variation is one of Earth's most stable characteristics. Too much order becomes rigid. Too much randomness becomes unstable. Life seems to exist comfortably in between, in the middle space where patterns are present but never fully fixed. This in-between quality appears even in human thought. Your mind does not operate in perfect logic or complete randomness. It moves through associations, images, memories, sensations, ideas connecting softly across time. Neurons fire in patterns that are structured, yet not fully predictable. This makes consciousness itself feel fluid, like weather inside the brain, changing but coherent. And just as Earth has long cycles that shape its surface, The mind also has internal cycles that shape experience. Attention rises and falls, energy fluctuates, focus sharpens and softens. There are moments when thinking feels fast and layered, and moments when it naturally slows into simplicity. Neither state is permanent. Both are part of a larger rhythm, and as night deepens, the brain often shifts towards slower patterns, less external processing, more internal integration, not necessarily sleep yet, but a gentle movement toward it. This transition mirrors many processes in nature: rivers slowing as they reach the ocean, wind settling after storms, daylight fading into evening. Transitions on Earth are rarely abrupt. They tend to blend, one state becoming another through gradual change. Even extinction events, though catastrophic in immediate impact, unfold within longer ecological transitions that span thousands of years of adaptation and recovery. Earth rarely draws hard lines between beginning and end. Instead, it uses gradients, shifts, continuities, and within those continuities, life finds room to adjust. This adaptability is one of the most persistent features of biology. When conditions change, life responds, not always successfully for every species, but always in some form. Evolution itself is not a destination. It is response, a continuous adjustment to shifting environments. Over time, this creates extraordinary diversity, millions of species exploring different ways to exist, some rooted in soil, some floating in air, some living in darkness, some thriving in light, some moving quickly, some almost entirely still. Each one represents a different solution to the same underlying question: how to continue? And that question is never fully answered, because conditions keep changing. The Earth is not static. Its climate shifts, its continents move, its ecosystems transform. Even the sun itself gradually changes over immense timescales. So life continues responding again and again, and within this endless responsiveness, stability emerges not from permanence, but from variation, from the ability to change without breaking. This principle applies at every scale, from cells adapting to stress, to ecosystems recovering from disturbance, to civilizations evolving through time. Change is not an interruption of life on Earth, it is its primary condition. And yet, despite this constant change, there are recurring structures that remain recognizable. The cycle of seasons, the rhythm of tides, the pattern of respiration, the alternation of rest and activity. These patterns give continuity to experience. They allow life to feel coherent even as everything shifts. Without them, existence would feel fragmented. But with them, change becomes readable. And perhaps that is part of why natural environments often feel grounding to the human mind. They reflect structured change, not chaos, not stillness, but rhythm, a kind of predictable transformation that the nervous system can quietly follow. As attention softens further, even ideas begin to feel less separate from one another. Time, breath, earth, body, memory, all part of the same unfolding system when viewed from a distance. No sharp boundaries, only layers of interaction. Even identity, when observed gently, feels less like a fixed point and more like a process, a pattern maintained through continuity, not something held still, but something sustained, moment by moment. And within this sustaining, rest becomes not an escape from life, but another form of participation in it, a different mode of alignment with Earth's rhythms. In sleep, awareness does not disappear entirely. It changes form. It becomes less structured, less directed, more diffuse, like weather spreading across a landscape instead of focusing into a single point. Dreams, when they arise, often reflect this loosened structure, fragments of memory, emotions reshaped, imaginative recombinations of experience. The brain continues its activity but without the constraints of waking logic. This allows for unusual connections, unexpected associations, soft explorations of possibility, and even in dreamless sleep, something essential continues: regulation, repair, restoration. The body maintains itself quietly, without effort from consciousness, as if awareness is temporarily handed back to the deeper systems that always supported it. And Earth continues alongside this process, rotating, circulating, cooling, warming, balancing. A planetary system that does not require observation to function, but which becomes meaningful when observed. And now, As this long exploration slowly settles, there is a sense that nothing new needs to be forced into place. The ideas have already unfolded, layered gradually, like sediment forming over time. What remains is the quiet recognition of continuity between systems, between cycles, between scales, from the smallest microbial process to the largest planetary movement. Everything participating in the same slow unfolding. And as thought begins to soften into stillness once more, Earth continues its ancient rhythm beneath you, steady, interconnected, endlessly turning. And even now, within this continuous turning, there is one more layer that quietly connects almost everything on Earth: memory. Not just human memory, but memory embedded in systems that do not think in the human sense. A river carries memory in its path. It remembers the shape of valleys carved over time. It remembers resistance from stone, gravity, rainfall, and seasons. That memory is not stored in a mind, but in movement itself, in the way water chooses routes that have been shaped before. Glaciers hold memory too. They preserve layers of snowfall compressed over thousands of years, each layer trapping traces of ancient atmospheres, dust from distant storms, even microscopic particles carried across continents. When scientists drill into ice cores, they are not just extracting frozen water, they are reading time, year by year, layer by layer, like pages in a slow, frozen book. Even soil contains memory. Each layer of earth holds remnants of plants, insects, microorganisms, and decayed matter from previous cycles of life. What grows today is always growing out of what once lived and returned. So Earth is not only a place where life exists, it is a place where life leaves traces that shape future life. This continuity gives the planet a kind of deep continuity that feels almost like patience. Not patience in a conscious sense, but in structure, in the way systems allow past states to influence future ones without rushing the process. Even mountains carry memory in their folds. Strata of rock reveal ancient oceans, volcanic eruptions, shifting continents. If you could read a mountain slowly enough, you would find that it contains entire histories of Earth's transformation. And all of this exists at once, layered in silence. Most of it is invisible to daily perception, because human attention is tuned to the present moment, to immediate surfaces, to what is directly in front of awareness. But beneath that surface, everything has depth. Even a simple patch of ground outside carries immense historical weight. If viewed through geological time, this idea can feel almost surreal at first. But the present moment is not isolated. It is built from accumulated pasts, and it is continuously becoming future. Nothing stands alone. Everything is connected through transformation. Even your own body reflects this layered continuity. The cells in your skin are constantly being replaced. The lining of your stomach renews itself over days. Even parts of your skeleton slowly rebuild across years. You are not physically identical to the version of yourself from years ago, and yet there is a sense of continuity that persists, not in material form, but in pattern, in organization, in the ongoing process that maintains identity through change. This raises a subtle idea that perhaps what feels like self is not a fixed object, but a stable flow, a pattern that continues long enough to be recognized as one thing, like a river that remains a river even though the water within it is always changing. This perspective naturally softens the way experience feels, because it removes the need for everything to remain fixed. Change becomes expected, even natural, even necessary, and Earth, in its long history, demonstrates this continuously. Entire species appear and disappear. Climates shift between extremes. Landscapes transform beyond recognition. And yet life continues, not because it resists change, but because it adapts through it. Adaptation is one of Earth's quietest constants. It does not announce itself. It simply happens over time. A gradual reshaping of structure in response to environment. And this reshaping occurs at every level. Genes adjusting across generations. Ecosystems shifting balance after disturbance. Species migrating, expanding, or narrowing their range. Nothing remains perfectly still, but nothing is entirely lost either. Even after major transitions, remnants remain embedded in new forms. Old structures influence new ones. This layering creates continuity through transformation, and that continuity is one of the most stable features of life on Earth. Even in the absence of human observation, it persists, which suggests that Earth does not depend on being witnessed in order to function. It simply functions, silently, continuously, in cycles that extend far beyond perception. One of those cycles is the carbon cycle, a quiet system that connects nearly all life on Earth. Carbon moves through air, water, soil, and organisms in an ongoing exchange. Plants take in carbon dioxide and convert it into organic matter. Animals consume plants and redistribute carbon through metabolism. Oceans absorb carbon and release it slowly over time. Soil stores carbon for long periods before releasing it again. Nothing in this system is static. Everything is in motion. Yet the cycle remains stable across long periods, not perfectly balanced, but dynamically regulated, like a slow breathing system for the entire planet. Inhale, exhale, carbon entering and leaving different reservoirs, and within this cycle, life participates without needing to understand the whole structure. Each organism performs a small part of a much larger process. A leaf, a fish, a human, a microorganism, all contributing to the same planetary exchange. This distributed participation is one of the defining characteristics of Earth's living systems. No single organism controls the system. Control is not centralized. It is emergent, arising from interaction, from countless small processes occurring simultaneously. And this idea extends beyond biology. Weather systems, ocean currents, and even atmospheric patterns behave in similar ways. Large-scale order emerging from local interactions. No single drop creates the ocean. Yet the ocean is entirely made of drops in motion. There is something deeply steady about this kind of organization, because it does not rely on perfection at the individual level. It relies on repetition, variation, and balance across scale. As night continues, the human mind often becomes more receptive to this kind of thinking, not because it tries harder, but because it is less occupied. External demands fade slightly. Internal processing becomes more noticeable. Thoughts move more slowly, less urgently, and in that slower movement, connections between ideas become more visible. Earth, body, time, cycle, change, not separate concepts, but parts of a single unfolding system. Even perception itself can feel less solid at this hour, more fluid, more open, less defined by boundaries. And in that openness, it becomes easier to notice that awareness is always occurring within a larger environment, never outside of it, always embedded, always supported by conditions that are not controlled by consciousness. Air, gravity, temperature, light, time. These forces quietly shape every moment of experience, and they continue whether they are noticed or not. There is no requirement for awareness for Earth to function, but awareness adds a reflective layer to existence, a way of experiencing what is already happening. And perhaps that is what makes quiet reflection feel meaningful. Not because it changes the world, but because it allows the world to be observed as it is, without urgency, without interruption, just presence within process. And as this long thread of ideas gently slows, there is no need for conclusion in a strict sense, because nothing here is ending. Everything is continuing in the same way it always has. Cycles remain in motion. Systems remain active. Earth remains alive in its own slow, continuous way. And you remain part of that ongoing movement, resting, breathing, gently carried forward within it. And even as that sense of continuity settles deeper, there is another quiet truth that sits underneath almost everything on Earth. Nothing exists alone, not even for a moment. Every object, every organism, every thought is shaped by relationships. Air exists because of interactions between gases, temperature, and pressure. Water exists because of bonds between hydrogen and oxygen under specific conditions. A forest exists because of relationships between soil, sunlight, fungi, rainfall, and time. Remove any one layer, and the structure changes entirely. Earth is not a collection of separate things. It is a network of dependencies, and those dependencies are so numerous that they become invisible when everything is working normally. A stable system often hides its own complexity, just as your breathing hides the full coordination between muscles, nerves, blood chemistry, and atmospheric composition. most of Earth's systems appear simple on the surface, while being deeply interconnected underneath. This hidden interdependence creates a kind of quiet stability, because when everything supports everything else, no single element carries the entire weight alone. Even ecosystems follow this principle. Predators and prey, plants and pollinators, fungi and roots, decomposers and organic matter. Each role is part of a larger balance that maintains continuity over time. If one part changes, others adjust, not instantly, but gradually, through feedback, through adaptation, through slow correction. This is one reason Earth can absorb disruption and still continue functioning, not because it is unbreakable, but because it is responsive, and responsiveness is one of the most powerful forms of stability. Even human systems, when they work well, mirror this structure. Communication networks, transportation systems, language itself, all depend on distributed coordination rather than central control. But Earth has been doing this far longer than human civilization. Long before cities or technology, natural systems were already building large-scale order through simple interactions repeated across time. And perhaps one of the most striking examples of this is the formation of weather patterns. No single part of the ocean decides to create a storm. No single cloud controls rainfall. Instead, heat, pressure, moisture, and rotation interact across vast regions of the atmosphere. Small variations amplify into larger structures, and those structures evolve as they move. A storm is not a fixed object. It is a process, a temporary organization of energy and matter. It forms, it shifts, it dissolves, and then the system resets, ready for the next pattern. This constant emergence and dissolution of patterns is one of Earth's most fundamental behaviors. Nothing stays in final form. Everything is transitional. Even landscapes that seem permanent are slowly changing. Coastlines erode. Rivers carve new paths. Mountains rise and fall over geological time. What appears stable is often just slow movement beyond perception. This creates an interesting perspective on stillness itself. Stillness is not absence of motion. It is motion too slow to notice. And in that sense, almost everything on Earth is moving at some scale. Even solid rock is slowly shifting under pressure. Even deep underground layers are adjusting to heat and tectonic forces. Even the planet itself rotates and orbits through space at extraordinary speed, though the motion feels invisible from the surface. So what humans experience as still is actually layered motion aligned in such a way that it cancels sensation, a kind of equilibrium of movement. And within that equilibrium, life becomes possible, because stability is not rigidity. It is balance among forces in motion. Life depends on this balance constantly. Too much change too quickly becomes destructive. Too little change over time becomes limiting. Earth exists in a narrow range where both stability and variation coexist, and life has evolved within that range, shaped by it, refined by it, and constantly responding to it. Even evolution itself can be understood as a response to this balance. Mutations introduce variation. Environmental pressures filter outcomes. Successful patterns persist long enough to reproduce. Across generations, this creates adaptation, not through planning, but through selection over time, slow refinement without intention. And yet, from that process emerges extraordinary complexity. Eyes that see, wings that fly, brains that think, ecosystems that self-organize, all arising from simple interactions repeated endlessly. There is something quietly profound in that. That complexity does not require design in the human sense. It can emerge from persistence, from repetition, from time interacting with variation. And time, on Earth, is always present in abundance, not evenly experienced, but continuously unfolding. Human perception divides time into seconds, hours, days, years, but Earth does not experience time in discrete units. It experiences change, flow, transition. The separation of time into segments is a cognitive structure, not a planetary one. In reality, everything is simply continuing, always moving forward, always transforming. Even now, while reading or listening, Countless processes are unfolding simultaneously in the background of awareness. Cells responding to chemical signals, air molecules exchanging energy with skin, neural networks adjusting activity patterns, the body maintaining temperature balance with its environment. None of this requires conscious direction. It happens automatically, quietly, reliably. And this automatic continuity is one of the reasons life can feel stable, even in a constantly changing world. Because beneath perception, there is consistency of process, and perhaps that is what the mind interprets as safety, not the absence of change, but the presence of reliable systems that continue through change. Earth is full of such systems, cycles that persist regardless of attention. Day becomes night, night becomes day, seasons return, oceans circulate, forests regenerate, atmospheres balance. These cycles do not depend on belief, they simply operate, and in their operation, they create the conditions for everything else to exist, including the brief experience of being aware of them, which brings a subtle reflection. That awareness itself is not separate from these cycles. It arises from them. It is part of the same system observing itself through a localized perspective, a temporary concentration of perception inside a larger flow, like a small window of clarity within a moving landscape. And that window does not need to grasp everything at once. It only needs to exist long enough to experience what is present, without effort, without resistance, without needing to hold the entire system in view. Because the system continues regardless. The earth continues regardless. Life continues regardless. And as thoughts begin to slow once more, there is a gentle easing into simplicity, not emptiness, but reduction. Less structure in thought, more openness in awareness, less analysis, more presence. And in that quieter space, the sense of separation between observer and environment becomes less defined. Air feels closer, sound feels softer, time feels less segmented, and everything becomes part of a single, continuous field of experience, still moving, still unfolding, still quietly alive beneath the night sky, steady, interconnected, and endlessly continuing. And as that continuous unfolding remains in the background, there is another layer of earth that often goes unnoticed, simply because it is too constant to draw attention. Temperature, not extreme heat or cold, but the subtle gradients that exist everywhere on the planet at all times. Warm air rising above sunlit ground, cool air settling in shaded valleys, ocean surfaces storing heat from daylight and releasing it slowly at night, deep underground layers maintaining temperatures that barely change over centuries. Temperature is not just a condition, it is a form of movement, energy shifting from one state to another. And this constant transfer is happening everywhere simultaneously. Even within your own body, heat is being carefully regulated in real time. Blood vessels expand and contract, metabolism adjusts slightly, skin releases or conserves warmth depending on environment, all without conscious direction. A silent balancing act between organism and world, and Earth itself performs a similar balancing act on a planetary scale. Heat from the sun enters the system. Some is reflected back into space. Some is absorbed by land and water. Some is stored and redistributed through currents and winds. Over time, this creates climate patterns, not fixed, but evolving, always adjusting, always responding. This responsiveness is what allows Earth to remain habitable across long periods of change. Because stability is not a static condition here. It is an ongoing negotiation between incoming energy and outgoing energy, between land and sea, between atmosphere and surface, between life and environment. And life is not separate from this negotiation. It participates in it. Forests influence humidity. Oceans regulate carbon exchange. Soils store and release nutrients. Microorganisms affect atmospheric composition, each layer contributing quietly to the overall balance. Nothing acting alone, everything interacting. And when you begin to view Earth through this lens, even ordinary phenomena start to feel different. A breeze is not just air moving. It is pressure equalizing across regions of temperature difference. A cloud is not just vapor. It is a temporary phase of water transitioning between states. Rain is not just weather. It is redistribution of matter and energy across the surface of a planet. Even silence outdoors is not empty. It is full of faint, layered signals that are simply too subtle to isolate individually. In this way, Earth is never truly simple, but it is coherent. Its complexity is organized through repetition and structure, and that structure creates familiarity even when details are unknown. This may be why humans can feel at ease in natural environments even without understanding them scientifically. The mind recognizes patterns even before it can explain them, and those patterns feel stable, predictable in their unpredictability, consistent in their variation. This balance between familiarity and change is one of the most calming features of the natural world, because it allows awareness to rest without needing full comprehension. You do not need to understand every process in a forest to feel its rhythm. You do not need to calculate ocean currents to sense their presence. You do not need to map atmospheric circulation to experience wind. The body responds directly to patterns before thought interprets them. And this direct response is ancient, older than language, older than written memory, older than civilization itself. It belongs to biological systems that evolved within these same environments over millions of years, which means that much of what feels calming in nature may be a kind of recognition, not intellectual recognition, but embodied recognition, a system encountering conditions it has always known: light patterns, sound rhythms, temperature variations, spatial openness. These are not new to the nervous system. They are familiar at a deep biological level, and so the response is often gentle, not excitement, not stimulation, but ease, a reduction in internal tension, a softening of attention. And as night deepens, this softening often becomes more noticeable. The world appears less demanding, less visually complex, less socially structured, more open, more continuous. Even distance feels different at night. Objects that were distinct during the day begin to merge into shared shadows. Edges become less defined. Forms become more suggestion than detail. And perception itself becomes quieter, not reduced in capability, but reduced in effort, as if the mind is no longer trying to categorize everything at full intensity. And in that reduced effort, a different kind of awareness emerges, one that is less about identification and more about presence, less about labeling experience and more about allowing it. This is often where thoughts begin to drift more slowly, not because they stop, but because they lose urgency. Ideas appear and fade without demanding continuation, and attention begins to rest more easily on simple sensations: breathing, stillness, subtle background sounds, the feeling of gravity holding the body in place. These sensations do not require interpretation. They simply exist, and existence itself, when not heavily analyzed, can feel surprisingly steady, because beneath all layers of complexity, there is always something simple happening: energy being exchanged, matter interacting, systems maintaining balance, life continuing its cycles. And within this continuity, even individual identity becomes less sharply defined, not disappearing, but becoming less central, more like a temporary focus within a larger field of processes, a small region of awareness moving through a vast environment of change. And that environment does not resist this movement, it accommodates it, because Earth is not structured around fixed points. It is structured around flows, flows of air, flows of water, flows of energy, flows of life. And awareness itself may simply be another type of flow occurring within this system, a pattern that arises, persists for a time, and eventually dissolves back into the larger continuity, like a wave forming on the surface of the ocean, distinct for a moment, then merging again with the water beneath it. No separation remaining, only continuity. And as this perspective settles more gently into awareness, there is no need to hold onto it firmly, because it is not something to grasp, it is something to notice and allow. That everything is already part of a larger movement. Everything is already connected through process. Everything is already continuing without interruption. And in that quiet recognition, thought naturally begins to slow further, not into emptiness, but into simplicity, where fewer ideas are needed, where experience becomes more immediate, more direct, less divided, and Earth continues in the background of it all, turning, breathing, circulating, balancing, without effort, without pause, and you remain within that motion, not outside it, not observing from elsewhere, but gently carried by it, steady, integrated, and softly continuing. And as that gentle continuity carries forward, there is another quiet dimension of Earth that often remains unnoticed simply because it does not announce itself. Scale, not just size, but the way reality changes its behavior depending on how closely or how widely you observe it. At the smallest scales, matter behaves in ways that feel almost unfamiliar to everyday intuition. Particles appear to move in uncertain patterns. Interactions happen probabilistically rather than predictably. Energy and matter behave as overlapping possibilities rather than fixed states. Yet at the scale of daily life, everything appears solid, stable, and continuous. A stone is a stone, a tree is a tree, a body is a body. Both descriptions are true, but they belong to different layers of observation. Earth exists across all of them at once, and life, too, exists across scales. Cells operate in microscopic coordination. Organs function as integrated systems. Entire organisms interact within ecosystems. Ecosystems interact across continents and oceans. Each level has its own rules of behavior, yet none of them are separate. They are nested, like Russian dolls of process and structure, each containing and supporting the others. This nested nature creates a quiet stability in complexity, because no single layer has to explain everything alone. Each layer only needs to function within its own range, and together they form coherence. Even consciousness may be part of this layered structure, a process emerging from microscopic interactions that gives rise to macroscopic experience, not located in one place, but distributed across networks of activity and experienced as unified from within. This unity is one of the most familiar aspects of being alive. Even though the underlying structure is deeply distributed, experience feels singular, a single stream of awareness moving through time. This stream is always changing, but it maintains continuity, and continuity itself is one of the most important features of life on Earth, because without continuity nothing could accumulate. No memory, no learning, no growth, no adaptation. Continuity allows patterns to persist long enough to develop complexity, and Earth is fundamentally a place where continuity has been sustained for billions of years, even through dramatic transitions, even through global change, even through extinction and renewal. The underlying processes continue. Energy flows, matter cycles, chemistry evolves, biology adapts, and over immense spans of time, this continuity produces landscapes that feel stable to human perception. But stability here is relative. A coastline that seems unchanged over a lifetime may have shifted significantly over centuries. A river that feels fixed in place is constantly reshaping its path in small increments. A forest that appears permanent is actually in a constant state of regeneration. Leaves fall, soil forms, seeds germinate, old structures decay and return to ground. The forest is always becoming itself again, not repeating exactly, but renewing through variation. And this renewal is not rushed. It is patient. It unfolds at the pace that allows systems to remain coherent while changing. This pacing is one of Earth's most defining characteristics. Nothing here needs to hurry, because there is no external deadline that the planet is responding to. Processes evolve according to internal balance. Feedback loops regulate change. Constraints guide direction, and time allows everything to integrate. Even catastrophic events, when viewed across longer scales, become part of larger patterns of adjustment. Volcanic eruptions reshape terrain. Earthquakes redistribute geological stress. Storms move heat and moisture across regions. What appears sudden in experience often becomes gradual in system perspective, and what appears permanent is often temporary in geological time. This contrast between perception and scale is one of the quiet sources of wonder in studying Earth, because it reveals how much of reality exists beyond immediate awareness. And yet, despite this vastness, human experience remains grounded in the present moment, a single point of perception moving through time. Here, now, continuously updating. And that present moment is always shaped by everything that has come before it, by inherited biological systems, by environmental conditions, by accumulated history embedded in matter and memory. The present is never isolated. It is always the result of previous states, and always becoming the foundation for future ones. This continuous unfolding creates a sense of flow through time, rather than movement across separate moments. And in that flow, even thoughts begin to feel less like discrete events and more like transitions. One idea softening into another, one perception blending into the next, one sensation dissolving gently into background awareness. Nothing fully stopping, nothing fully starting, just gradual transformation. And Earth reflects this same quality in almost every system it contains. Weather transitions rather than switching. Seasons blend rather than change abruptly. Day becomes night through fading light rather than instant replacement. Even ecosystems shift gradually as conditions evolve. This preference for gradients over sharp boundaries is one of the reasons Earth feels stable despite constant change, because transitions are softened, and softened transitions are easier for life to exist within. Sharp change requires resistance or adaptation. Gradual change allows integration, and life on Earth is built around integration. Matter integrates into structure, energy integrates into cycles, organisms integrate into ecosystems, experience integrates into memory. Everything becomes part of something larger through gradual connection. And as attention becomes quieter in this kind of reflection, even thinking itself begins to feel less structured, less like analysis, more like observation. Ideas appear and drift without urgency, and awareness no longer needs to hold onto them tightly, because nothing here requires conclusion. Nothing is being solved. Nothing is being finalized. Everything is simply continuing, and that continuity itself becomes the central feature of experience, a steady background of existence that does not depend on interpretation. Earth continues regardless of thought. Life continues regardless of understanding. Processes continue regardless of attention, and awareness moves gently within that ongoing field, like a small current within a much larger flow. Not separate, not isolated, but participating. And as this sense of participation deepens, even the distinction between observer and environment begins to soften. The boundary becomes less defined, more porous, more fluid, as if everything is part of the same unfolding system viewed from different perspectives. And in that realization, there is no urgency to hold on to clarity, because clarity itself is not a fixed state. It is another temporary arrangement within change, and change itself is not disruption. It is the default condition of Earth, constant, quiet transformation, flowing beneath all things, carrying everything forward without effort, and continuing, always continuing, as it has since the beginning of time, as it is experienced here. And as that sense of continuous movement deepens, there is one more layer of Earth that quietly ties together almost everything you have been moving through. Interdependence through time. Not just things connected in space, but connections that stretch across generations, across eras, across entire histories of change. Nothing on Earth is only for now. Everything is also because of before. Forests exist because earlier forests existed. Soils are fertile because countless organisms decomposed before them. Atmospheres are what they are because ancient life altered their composition. Even landscapes carry the shape of events that no living human has ever witnessed. The present is always built on accumulated past, and the future is always being shaped by what exists right now. This creates a kind of temporal layering, where every moment is both outcome and origin at the same time. A single falling leaf is simple to observe, but it is also part of a much longer sequence. It grew from sunlight that traveled through space, from water that cycled through oceans and clouds, from nutrients that were once part of other living systems. And when it returns to the ground, it becomes part of soil that will support future growth. Nothing in that process is isolated. It is all continuation, and this continuation extends far beyond visible life. Even stone participates in it. Sediment accumulates slowly. Pressure transforms it over immense time. Heat reshapes it again, and what was once loose material becomes solid rock, only to eventually erode and return to sediment once more. Earth does not treat materials as final forms. It treats them as stages, temporary expressions of ongoing cycles. And within those cycles, life has found a way to exist not outside the system, but inside it, fully embedded, fully dependent, fully integrated, which means that life is not an interruption of Earth's processes. It is one of Earth's processes, one expression of planetary behavior among many, Forests are not separate from climate. They are part of climate regulation. Oceans are not separate from atmosphere. They are part of atmospheric balance. Microorganisms are not separate from soil. They are part of soil formation itself. Even human civilization is not outside Earth's systems. It is embedded within them, shaped by them, dependent on them, and continuously influencing them in return. This mutual shaping creates feedback loops that extend across time. Small changes accumulate into large effects. Large systems influence small details, and everything adjusts in response to everything else. Nothing remains fully independent. And because of this, Earth behaves less like a collection of objects and more like a continuously adjusting network, a system that self-regulates through interaction. When energy increases in one area, it redistributes. When resources become scarce in another, systems adapt. When conditions shift, responses emerge, not centrally directed, but collectively generated. And this collective generation produces patterns that are remarkably stable over long periods, not because they are fixed, but because they are flexible. Stability through adaptation, balance through change, continuity through transformation. This is one of the most important underlying principles of life on Earth, and it appears again and again in different forms, in ecosystems, in weather systems, in biological evolution, in even the structure of human thought. Because thought itself is not static. It is constantly updating based on new input, memory, association, and context, a continuous reconstruction of experience, never exactly the same twice, and yet perceived as coherent, like a river that remains recognizable despite constant movement of water. This kind of continuity is subtle. It is not maintained by stillness. It is maintained by consistent transformation. And as attention becomes quieter, this idea can begin to feel more intuitive than conceptual, not something to analyze, but something to notice, that everything is in motion, yet nothing is disconnected. Even stillness is part of motion. Even silence is part of a larger acoustic field. Even darkness is part of a planetary rotation, and even rest is part of biological regulation. Nothing exists outside of context. Everything belongs to a surrounding system of relationships, and within that system, human awareness is just one expression among countless others, a localized point of experience within a vast, interconnected environment, not separate from it, not observing from outside it, but occurring inside it, shaped by it, and shaping perception of it in return. This mutual shaping is subtle but constant, because even perception changes how systems are interpreted, though not how they fundamentally exist. A forest is still a forest whether seen or not, but its meaning changes depending on awareness, and meaning itself is something that emerges only when life becomes capable of reflection. This reflective capacity is rare in the universe as far as current understanding suggests, a planet observing itself through conscious systems embedded within it, not controlling the system, not separate from it, but temporarily aware of it. And that awareness does not need to grasp the entirety of what it observes, because the system does not require full understanding in order to function. It simply continues, through cycles, through feedback, through time. And as this recognition becomes softer in thought, it is no longer something that needs to be held intellectually. It becomes more like a background sense that everything is already in motion, everything is already connected, everything is already unfolding without interruption. And the role of awareness is not to direct this unfolding, but to experience it moment by moment, without resistance, without urgency, without needing to complete anything, just presence within continuation. And as the night grows deeper in imagination, even that sense of structure begins to loosen further. Thought becomes quieter, images fade, ideas dissolve into background stillness, and what remains is a simple continuity of experience, flowing, resting, and gently carried forward within the vast, living system of Earth. And even within that gentle flow, there is one final layer that quietly sits beneath almost everything else on Earth. Return, not as repetition in the strict sense, but as cycles that come back in slightly different forms each time. Return is one of Earth's most persistent patterns. Day returns after night, night returns after day. Seasons return in sequence. Rains return after heat. Growth returns after dormancy. Nothing returns exactly the same way it was before, but something recognizable always comes back. This creates a sense of rhythm in the world, a feeling that change is not random, but patterned, not predictable in detail, but familiar in structure. Even life itself is built on return. Breathing returns in cycles. Heartbeats return in pulses. Sleep returns nightly. Hunger returns after time. Restoration returns after effort. The body is not a linear system. It is a cyclical one, and that cyclic nature connects it directly to Earth's larger cycles. The rotation of the planet creates repeating days. The orbit around the sun creates repeating years. The movement of oceans creates repeating currents. The shifting of atmospheric pressure creates repeating weather patterns. Even ecosystems often depend on cycles of disturbance and recovery. Fire followed by regrowth. Flooding followed by renewal. Drought followed by adaptation. In many ways, Earth does not move forward in a straight line. It moves in loops, not closed loops that repeat identically, but open loops that evolve while returning, like spirals, always circling back, but never to the exact same point. This spiral nature of Earth's processes creates a kind of gentle continuity through change, because even when conditions shift dramatically, they often do so within recognizable patterns. Humans experience this in daily life as well. Emotional states return in waves. Thought patterns reappear in slightly different forms. Memories surface and fade again. Attention cycles between focus and rest. Nothing in inner experience remains fixed either. It comes and goes, arrives and departs, and often returns later in altered form. This return is not failure of change. It is how continuity is maintained. Because without return, there would be no familiarity, no rhythm, no structure across time. Everything would simply be one thing after another with no recognizable pattern. But Earth is not like that. It is patterned continuity, and that continuity is built from repetition with variation. Even evolution itself is a form of return. Traits appear, disappear, and reappear in modified versions across different species and eras. Eyes evolve in multiple lineages independently. Flight emerges in different forms across insects, birds, and mammals. Social structures appear repeatedly in unrelated organisms. Certain solutions to survival return again and again, not because they are copied, but because conditions guide systems towards similar outcomes. In this sense, Earth is constantly exploring a space of possibilities, trying variations, retaining what works, allowing what does not to fade, and then re-exploring again under new conditions. This creates an ongoing experiment that never truly ends, because conditions themselves are always changing. Even now, subtle changes are occurring in background systems. Atmospheric composition shifts slightly with seasons. Ocean currents adjust with temperature variations. Biological systems respond to environmental cues in real time. Everything is slightly different from a moment ago, and yet the overall structure remains recognizable. This balance between change and return is one of the deepest sources of stability on Earth, because it allows transformation without loss of coherence, and coherence without rigidity, a system that can change while remaining itself. And perhaps this is what makes Earth feel so quietly consistent across time, not because it is unchanging, but because its changes are patterned, and those patterns repeat in evolving forms. Even landscapes carry this sense of return. Rivers return to oceans, clouds return as rain, water returns to atmosphere, forests return after clearing, life returns after dormancy, and in every return, something slightly different is carried forward. Memory is embedded in cycles, not conscious memory, but structural memory, the imprint of previous states influencing future ones. So even when something appears to begin again, it is never starting from zero. It is starting from what came before, and that accumulation creates depth. Depth of time, depth of change, depth of continuity. Human awareness often experiences only a thin slice of this depth at any given moment. The present feels immediate, but it is actually layered with countless past conditions and future possibilities unfolding around it. And as attention softens further, this layering becomes less conceptual and more experiential. A sense that time is not moving past you, but moving through you and through everything around you, continuously, without separation. And in that continuity, even the distinction between inside and outside begins to lose sharpness, because breath connects body to atmosphere, perception connects mind to environment, biology connects organism to ecosystem, ecosystem connects to planet, planet connects to space. Everything becomes part of nested relationships extending outward and inward at the same time. No clear boundary holds for long under this kind of attention, only layers of interaction. And those layers remain in motion, even when everything feels still, especially when everything feels still, because stillness is simply motion balanced into equilibrium. And equilibrium itself is dynamic, always adjusting, always maintaining, always responding. So nothing is ever truly frozen. Nothing is ever completely static. Even this moment, experienced as quiet, is full of subtle activity beneath awareness. Breathing continues, heartbeat continues, atmospheric exchange continues, planetary rotation continues, and time continues without interruption. There is no point where Earth stops to reset. It simply moves forward through transformation, and awareness moves with it, moment by moment, not separate, not paused outside of it, but carried within it. And as this long exploration gently softens again, there is no final conclusion forming, only continuity remaining. A sense that everything is still unfolding, still returning, still transforming, still quietly existing within the larger motion of Earth, steady, cyclical, and endlessly continuing. And as that endless continuity settles deeper into awareness, there is one more quiet layer that brings many of these patterns together into a single, unifying perspective. Interdependence not just in space, and not just in time, but in emergence itself. Emergence is what happens when simple parts combine to create something that cannot be fully predicted from the parts alone. It is one of Earth's most fundamental behaviors. Water molecules become waves, cells become organs, organs become organisms, organisms become ecosystems. At each level, something new appears, not separate from what came before, but not reducible to it either. A wave is not just water, a forest is not just trees, a mind is not just neurons firing individually. Something additional arises from the relationships between parts, a pattern of organization, a structure of interaction, a behavior of the whole system. And this whole system behavior is often what defines Earth's most recognizable features. Oceans are not just water bodies, they are dynamic systems of circulation. Atmosphere is not just gas, it is a moving, energy-distributing envelope. Life is not just chemistry, it is self-sustaining organization that adapts and evolves. And consciousness, as far as it is understood, may itself be an emergent process arising from complex biological interaction, not located in a single point, but distributed across networks. Emergence has a quiet quality to it, because it does not announce itself at the level of individual components. It becomes visible only when viewed as a whole, and even then, it often feels subtle, like patterns becoming visible only when stepping back far enough. Earth is filled with these emergent systems, weather patterns emerging from air and heat, ecological networks emerging from species interactions, geological formations emerging from pressure and time, even social systems emerging from communication between individuals. And each of these systems has its own kind of intelligence, not conscious intelligence in the human sense, but adaptive structure, the ability to respond, reorganize, and persist. This kind of intelligence is distributed. It exists in the relationships between things rather than within a single controlling center. And because of this, Earth behaves less like a machine and more like a self-organizing field, continuously adjusting, continuously responding, continuously forming new patterns from old components. Even destruction participates in this process, because when structures break down, their components do not disappear. They re-enter other cycles. Energy disperses, matter recombines, systems reorganize. What ends in one form becomes input for another. So nothing is truly final in the absolute sense, only transitions. And this idea becomes clearer when observing long time scales. Entire mountain ranges erode into sediment. Sediment becomes rock. Rock becomes uplifted into mountains again. Forests collapse and become soil. Soil becomes forests again. Oceans shift boundaries and reshape continents over time. Earth does not preserve permanence, it preserves process. And within that ongoing process, life exists as one of the most sensitive and responsive systems. Because life does not only adapt to environment, it also modifies it. Trees change atmospheric composition. Microorganisms alter chemical cycles. Animals reshape landscapes through movement and behavior. Even human activity has become a planetary force in shaping environmental systems, not separate from Earth, but embedded within its feedback loops, which means that every action, even at small scale, participates in larger systems of change, not in isolation, but in accumulation. And accumulation is one of Earth's most powerful principles. Small changes repeated over time become large transformations. Drops form rivers, particles form mountains, moments form histories. Nothing large appears instantly. It is always built. And because it is built gradually, it can also be rebuilt. This gives Earth a kind of quiet resilience, not because it avoids disruption, but because it integrates disruption into ongoing cycles. Disturbance becomes part of renewal, breakdown becomes part of reconstruction, and even loss becomes part of future formation. This does not mean all change is gentle. It only means that change is always incorporated into continuing systems, even when it feels abrupt at human scale. Over longer spans, Earth absorbs and reorganizes again and again, without needing direction, without needing pause, just through the continuous interaction of forces already present. And within this continuous interaction, life persists as a temporary yet recurring expression of planetary conditions, always appearing where conditions allow, always adapting to new environments, always participating in cycles of matter and energy, and always returning, in different forms, across time. Even human awareness itself can be seen within this framework, a momentary concentration of perception arising from biological processes shaped by Earth's history, not separate from it, not outside it, but one of its ongoing expressions, a way the planet experiences itself from within localized perspective. And that perspective does not need to capture everything at once. It only needs to exist long enough to observe fragments of the larger whole, because the whole does not require full comprehension to continue functioning. It simply continues through cycles, through emergence, through interaction, through time. And as attention softens further into this understanding, even the need to define or structure experience begins to fade. Thoughts become lighter, less structured, more fluid. Ideas no longer feel like separate objects, but like movements within a shared field of awareness. And that field itself feels less divided between observer and observed, as if everything is part of one continuous unfolding process, still changing, still active, still alive in its own quiet way. And Earth remains present within that unfolding, not as background, not as setting, but as the ongoing system through which all of this occurs, breathing through atmosphere, circulating through oceans, transforming through life, expanding through time, and carrying every moment forward into the next without interruption, steady, emergent, and endlessly becoming. And as that sense of ongoing becoming settles deeper, there is one final perspective that gently brings all of these patterns into a wider, quieter frame. The idea that Earth is not only a place of processes, but a place of translation, a continuous conversion of one form into another, light into chemical energy, energy into motion, motion into structure, structure into experience, experience into memory, memory into future behavior. Nothing on Earth remains in its original form for long. Everything is translated forward. This translation is not linear. It loops, it branches, it returns, and in doing so, it creates continuity across transformation. Sunlight, for example, does not remain sunlight. It becomes stored in leaves. It becomes part of food chains. It becomes movement in animals. It becomes heat in bodies. It becomes energy released back into the environment. The same initial input transforms repeatedly across systems, and yet, nothing is lost, only redistributed. This principle extends across almost every level of Earth's functioning. Water becomes cloud. Cloud becomes rain. Rain becomes river. River becomes ocean. Ocean becomes vapor again. A continuous cycle of state changes. Each stage temporary. Each stage necessary. And within those cycles, life has found a way to stabilize itself temporarily, not by stopping change, but by participating in it in structured ways. Cells maintain order through constant exchange with environment. Organisms maintain identity through continuous metabolism. Ecosystems maintain balance through shifting relationships between species. Nothing in biology is static. Everything is maintained through flow. And this flow is always connected to Earth's larger systems: atmosphere, hydrosphere, lithosphere, biosphere, each layer interacting with the others, each layer influencing the rest, and none of them functioning in isolation. Even the boundaries between these systems are more conceptual than absolute, because gases dissolve into oceans. Oceans interact with land. Land shapes atmospheric movement. Life exists across all of them simultaneously. So Earth is not divided into separate spheres. It is a single integrated system expressed in multiple dimensions. And within that integration, complexity does not lead to fragmentation. It leads to coherence, because interactions create structure, and structure allows stability to emerge from motion. This is one of the most subtle truths about natural systems, that stability is not the absence of change. It is the coordination of change. When changes are balanced across multiple interacting parts, the system maintains continuity, even as everything within it is shifting. This kind of stability is dynamic, always adjusting, always recalibrating, always responding. And because of that responsiveness, Earth can sustain life over vast spans of time, not by remaining unchanged, but by remaining adaptable. Adaptability is not a feature of individual organisms alone. It is a property of the system as a whole, a global pattern of adjustment expressed through countless local interactions. And this global pattern extends into deep time, across extinction events, across climate shifts, across geological transformations. Each transition does not erase the system, it reshapes it. Life reappears in new forms, environments reorganize, processes continue, not identically, but continuously. This continuity through transformation is one of Earth's defining characteristics, and it creates a kind of quiet resilience that is not visible in any single moment, but becomes apparent across long observation. From this perspective, even endings are not absolute. They are transitions within a larger continuity. What disappears in one form reappears in another. What ceases locally continues globally. Nothing fully exits the system. Everything remains part of it in some transformed state. And within that understanding, even human experience becomes part of a much wider continuity. A brief concentration of awareness arising from biological processes shaped by Earth's history, not separate from that history, but one expression of it. A momentary point where the system becomes aware of itself from within, and that awareness does not stand outside the flow. It moves with it, it changes with it, it participates in it, just like everything else. And as this perspective deepens gently, there is no need to hold it tightly, because it is not a conclusion. It is a way of seeing continuity, that everything is already in motion, already connected, already transforming, through cycles that repeat with variation, through systems that stabilize through change, through time that carries everything forward without interruption. And Earth remains the medium of all of this, not separate from it, not beneath it, but expressed through it, a living system of processes, patterns, and relationships unfolding continuously across scales too large and too small to ever fully grasp at once. And as awareness rests within that understanding, thoughts naturally begin to quiet again, not stopping, just softening, becoming less structured, more open, more like background motion than defined form. And in that quiet openness, everything remains present without needing to be held. Earth continues, life continues, cycles continue, and awareness simply moves with them, steady, flowing, and endlessly continuing within the living system of Earth. And as that continuity gently settles deeper, there is one final way of understanding Earth that brings many of these layers together without needing any new concepts at all. Not as a new idea, but as a shift in attention, from things happening to relationships happening. Because nothing on Earth ever appears in complete isolation. Every event is always surrounded by conditions that make it possible. A wave is never separate from the ocean. A shadow is never separate from light. A thought is never separate from the mind that holds it. A living organism is never separate from the environment that sustains it. Even what seems like a single, simple moment is actually a convergence of countless influences: temperature, pressure, chemistry, history, memory, energy, time, all meeting in one point of experience, and then continuing onward. This convergence is not static. It is constantly reshaping itself, because the relationships between things are always changing, even when the things themselves appear stable. A forest is not defined only by the trees it contains. It is defined by the interactions between those trees, the soil, the air, the water, the sunlight, and the organisms that move through it. Remove one element, and the relationships shift. Add something new, and the system reorganizes. So what truly defines Earth is not its components, but the way those components interact. And interaction is always dynamic, always in motion, always adjusting. This means Earth is less like a collection of objects and more like a continuously unfolding pattern of relationships, a pattern that never fully repeats, but always remains recognizable. Like music that evolves over time. Different notes, different rhythms, but still part of a coherent composition. And in that sense, Earth itself can be thought of as a kind of ongoing symphony of processes, not composed in advance, but generated through interaction. Each system responding to others, each cycle influencing the next, each change becoming input for further change. Nothing isolated, nothing independent. Everything participating, even silence, is part of this symphony. Because silence is not absence. It is simply the absence of dominant signals. But beneath silence, subtle processes continue. Air continues to move. Molecules continue to collide. Biological systems continue to function. Time continues to pass. So even stillness is active at smaller scales. And this layered activity creates a kind of depth to reality. Different levels of motion existing simultaneously. Fast processes and slow processes overlapping. Visible changes and invisible changes unfolding together. Human perception tends to focus on only one layer at a time. The immediate layer, the one that is most relevant for survival or attention. But Earth is never operating on a single layer. It is always operating across many layers simultaneously. And these layers are interdependent. A change in one layer can eventually influence another, even if the connection is not immediately visible. This is why Earth systems often feel both stable and fluid at the same time. Stable at one scale, fluid at another, predictable in patterns, unpredictable in details. And this dual nature is not a contradiction. It is structure across scale, one of the defining features of complex systems. And Earth is one of the most complex systems known, not because it is chaotic, but because it integrates so many interacting parts across so many different levels of time and space. And yet, within this vast complexity, life has found ways to exist in relative simplicity, by participating in cycles, by adapting to patterns, by aligning with environmental rhythms. Sleep aligns with night, activity aligns with light, growth aligns with seasons, migration aligns with climate. Life does not resist Earth's systems, it synchronizes with them. And through synchronization, stability emerges, not as permanence, but as compatibility, a temporary harmony between organism and environment. And that harmony is always changing, always being renegotiated, always adjusting to new conditions. Even now, within this moment, countless adjustments are occurring silently, inside cells, inside ecosystems, inside atmospheric systems, inside oceans and soils and forests, and none of it requires conscious coordination. It simply happens through interaction, which means Earth does not need to be directed in order to remain coherent. Coherence arises naturally from structure and relationship, and within that structure, awareness itself appears, not as an external observer, but as part of the system becoming aware of itself locally, a temporary focusing of attention within a much larger field of activity. And that attention does not need to capture the whole system, because the system continues regardless of what is known about it. It does not require comprehension to function. It only requires interaction. And interaction is always already happening, between air and body, between light and surface, between organisms and environment. between time and change. Everything is already in contact with everything else in some way, even at distances, even across time. Because influence does not require immediacy, it accumulates slowly, quietly, over long periods, and becomes structure, becomes pattern, becomes the world as it is experienced. So when attention rests without effort, what is most present is not separation, but continuity of relation, a sense that everything is already part of everything else, not in a symbolic way, but in a physical, ongoing way, through matter, through energy, through time, through interaction. And as this understanding gently softens again into experience, there is no need for final resolution, because nothing here is concluding, nothing here is stopping. Everything remains in motion, everything remains connected, everything remains part of the same unfolding system. And Earth continues in the background of it all, not as something distant, but as the very medium through which this unfolding occurs, still turning, still circulating, still transforming, without pause, without end. And awareness remains within it, quiet, continuous, and gently carried forward within the living, interconnected system of Earth. And as that gentle continuity remains present, there is one more way of seeing Earth that brings everything even closer to a single, simple observation: that all change is movement through states, not disappearance, not creation from nothing, but transformation from one arrangement into another. A seed does not become a tree by leaving itself behind. It becomes a tree by reorganizing what it already is, over time, under the influence of its environment. Water does not stop being water when it becomes vapor or ice. It simply changes structure. Energy does not vanish when it moves through systems. It changes form. Earth, at every level, is a continuous reconfiguration of existing materials and conditions, and life is part of that reconfiguration, a particularly sensitive and adaptive form of it, not separate from physical processes, but deeply embedded within them. So when a forest grows, it is not something being added to Earth. It is Earth rearranging itself into a forest-shaped pattern. When a storm forms, it is not an external event imposed on the planet. It is atmosphere redistributing energy across space and time. When a river carves a valley, it is not something acting upon Earth from outside. It is Earth shaping itself through water, gravity, and time. This perspective gently dissolves the idea of separation between event and environment. Everything that happens is Earth happening, and everything that changes is Earth changing its own configuration. Even life, which often feels distinct because of movement and perception, is part of this same ongoing self-organization. Cells dividing, organisms responding, ecosystems adjusting, all part of the same planetary process expressing itself at different scales. And this process has no fixed endpoint, no final form it is trying to reach. It is simply ongoing adjustment, a system exploring what it can become under constantly shifting conditions, which means Earth is not moving toward completion. It is moving through variation, and variation is endless because conditions are always changing. Light changes, temperature changes, atmospheric composition changes, geological structures change, biological systems change, and as everything changes, everything else responds. This responsiveness creates a continuous loop of adjustment, a feedback structure that sustains coherence without requiring permanence. And within that loop, stability appears as a pattern of balance maintained through motion, not stillness, motion in equilibrium, like a river that maintains its shape even as water flows through it continuously. The shape is real, but the contents are always changing. This distinction between pattern and substance appears everywhere on Earth. A coastline maintains its recognizable outline even while erosion constantly reshapes it. A species maintains its identity even while genetic variation occurs across generations. A climate system maintains recognizable seasonal cycles even while yearly variations occur within them. So what persists is not material sameness, but structural continuity. and structural continuity is maintained through repetition. Repetition with variation, cycles that return but never exactly repeat. This creates a sense of familiarity across time, even as details change. And this familiarity is one of the quiet foundations of life on Earth, because it allows organisms to anticipate patterns without needing certainty. Day follows night, seasons follow each other, resources fluctuate in cycles, environments shift within ranges. Predictability is never absolute, but it is sufficient to support adaptation, and adaptation is always ongoing. Even now, every living system is adjusting in small ways to immediate conditions, not consciously in most cases, but through built-in responsiveness. Cells respond to signals, plants respond to light, animals respond to temperature, microorganisms respond to chemical gradients. Life is continuously negotiating its position within Earth's systems, not as an outsider, but as an embedded participant. And this embeddedness means that every organism is part of the environment for other organisms. There is no clear boundary between self and surroundings at the system level, only different scales of interaction. This becomes especially clear when considering cycles of matter. The atoms in air, soil, water, and living tissue are constantly exchanged. Nothing remains permanently assigned to one form. Carbon moves through plants, animals, oceans, and atmosphere. Nitrogen cycles through soil, microbes, and organisms. Water cycles through evaporation, precipitation, and flow. Everything is in circulation, and circulation means nothing is truly separate. Even what feels like stability is temporary arrangement within flow. So Earth can be understood as a vast circulation system of matter, energy, and information, where information is carried in patterns of structure and behavior, and those patterns influence future states of the system. This makes Earth not only physical, but also informational in a broad sense, because past configurations influence future possibilities. Memory exists not only in minds, but in structure, in soil layers, in atmospheric composition, in ecological relationships, in evolutionary pathways. The present is shaped by accumulated information from the past, and the future is shaped by how that information continues to unfold. Within this framework, even time feels less like a straight line, and more like a layered field of influence, where past states remain active through their effects, and future states are continuously being prepared by current conditions. And in the middle of all of this, awareness appears, not outside the system, but within it, a localized expression of Earth's ongoing processes, capable of reflecting parts of the system back onto itself, not comprehensively, but partially, enough to notice patterns, enough to recognize cycles, enough to sense continuity. And that sense of continuity is what allows experience to feel coherent across time, even though every moment is new. And as attention continues to soften, this coherence does not need to be actively maintained. It is already present in the structure of experience itself, because experience is always already embedded in ongoing processes. Breathing continues, circulation continues, atmospheric exchange continues, planetary motion continues. Nothing pauses for awareness, but awareness participates within what is already continuing. And so, in the quietest sense, there is nothing to resolve here, no final point to reach, no conclusion to complete, only ongoing transformation, ongoing relationship, ongoing movement through cycles and scales and layers of Earth. And as thought gently fades into softer awareness again, what remains is simply this: continuity without effort, connection without separation, and Earth continuing itself through time, steady, interdependent, and endlessly unfolding. And as that endless unfolding continues in the background of awareness, there is one more perspective that quietly gathers all of these patterns into something even simpler. Not a new idea, but a quieter way of seeing what was always already present. That Earth is not something you are on, but something you are made of, not metaphorically, but physically, structurally, continuously. The air entering the lungs is Earth's atmosphere. The minerals in the body are Earth's geology. The water in circulation is Earth's hydrology. The energy moving through cells is Earth's sunlight, transformed and stored through countless steps. There is no point where you begin and Earth ends in a clean separation. There is only exchange, constant exchange, ongoing exchange. So what appears as an individual life is actually a temporary configuration of Earth's materials organized into a self-maintaining pattern, a pattern that holds for a time, then changes, then returns in different forms elsewhere. This is not something that happens occasionally. It is continuous. Every breath is exchange. Every heartbeat is exchange. Every moment of perception is exchange between system and environment. Nothing remains contained. Everything is moving across boundaries that are always shifting. And because of this, identity itself can be understood less as a fixed object and more as a process of ongoing participation, a stable pattern of activity within a larger field of activity, not separate from it, but expressed through it. Like a wave is not separate from the ocean, only a temporary shape within it. And just as waves are not lost when they dissolve, but simply return to the water from which they formed, nothing in Earth's system is truly lost either, only reconfigured, reintegrated, redistributed. This continuity of transformation creates a deep kind of consistency in the natural world. Not consistency of form, but consistency of process. Change continues in recognizable ways. Cycles continue through variation. Patterns repeat with difference. And through that repetition, Earth maintains coherence across immense spans of time, even when everything within it is changing. This is why Earth can feel both ancient and immediate at the same time. Ancient in its processes, immediate in its expression. The same cycles that shaped early oceans still shape modern weather. The same biological principles that guided early life still guide living systems today. Nothing fundamental has stopped operating. It has only evolved in expression, and within this evolving expression, life continues to arise wherever conditions allow, not as an exception to Earth, but as part of Earth's own behavior, a way the planet organizes energy into self-sustaining, adaptive structures. Life is not something added to Earth. It is Earth expressing complexity in a particular form, and consciousness, as far as it is understood, may be one of the most intricate expressions of that complexity, a system capable of reflecting its own processes internally, not fully, not completely, but partially, enough to recognize patterns, enough to anticipate cycles, enough to experience continuity through time. And that experience of continuity is deeply tied to rhythm, because rhythm is how time becomes structured in experience. Breath becomes rhythm, heartbeat becomes rhythm, thought becomes rhythm, sleep becomes rhythm, season becomes rhythm, planetary motion becomes rhythm, and rhythm creates predictability within change, not by stopping change, but by organizing it so that it can be experienced without disorientation. And Earth is, at every scale, rhythmic. Even in systems that appear chaotic at first glance, deeper patterns of rhythm often emerge over time. Storm systems form and dissipate. Ocean currents circulate in long loops. Ecosystems fluctuate but maintain long-term balance. Populations rise and fall within environmental constraints. Nothing is completely random, but nothing is completely fixed either. Everything exists within ranges, and those ranges are shaped by interaction. Interaction between energy and matter, between life and environment, between time and change. And within those interactions, stability is always temporary, but continuity is persistent, because even when forms change, the underlying processes remain. This is why Earth never needs to return to a previous state, because it never truly leaves continuity. It only shifts within it, and every shift becomes part of what comes next. So there is no final condition Earth is trying to achieve, no ultimate configuration, only ongoing adjustment, ongoing balancing, ongoing transformation across scales too large and too small to fully perceive at once. And within that vast, continuous adjustment, awareness appears as one of the ways the system experiences itself locally, a focused region of perception within a much larger field of activity, not separate from it, not above it, but within it and always dependent on it. Because without the underlying processes of Earth, awareness itself could not exist. It arises from them, it is sustained by them, and it returns to them, just like everything else. And as attention rests within this understanding, there is no need to hold it tightly, because nothing here is fragile. Nothing here depends on being maintained by thought. Earth continues whether it is considered or not. Life continues whether it is understood or not. Cycles continue whether they are observed or not, and awareness simply moves along with them, sometimes noticing, sometimes not, sometimes active, sometimes quiet, but always embedded, always participating, always part of the same unfolding system. And as this recognition gently settles, thoughts begin to lose structure again, not disappearing, just softening into background motion, like wind spreading evenly through a landscape, no longer forming distinct shapes, just movement, just presence, just continuity. And Earth remains in that continuity, turning through space, circulating through cycles, transforming through time, without interruption, without separation, without beginning or end that can be clearly isolated, only ongoing process. And within that process, everything remains connected, everything remains changing, and everything remains quietly, steadily, endlessly becoming. And as that sense of becoming continues to soften into deeper stillness, there is one final perspective that does not add anything new to Earth's story, but simply reveals the quiet simplicity that has been present in every layer all along. That everything on Earth is movement held in relationship, not isolated movement, not independent motion, but motion shaped by other motion. Air moves because of pressure differences created by temperature. Water moves because of gravity, heat, and terrain. Life moves because of energy exchange and biological regulation. Thought moves because of neural activity shaped by experience and environment. Nothing moves alone. Everything moves in response, and that responsiveness is what gives Earth its coherence, because a fully independent system would not be able to stabilize itself. But a relational system can. A system where every part adjusts to every other part, creates balance not through control, but through interaction. And interaction is always ongoing, which means balance is always ongoing too. Never finished, never completed, just maintained through continuous adjustment. This is why Earth does not need to reach a final form, because its form is always the result of current relationships, and those relationships are always changing. So Earth is not a finished structure. It is a maintained condition, a condition that persists through constant transformation. And within that condition, life exists as one expression of relational movement. Cells relating to cells, organisms relating to environments, species relating to ecosystems, ecosystems relating to planetary cycles, and even consciousness itself may be understood as relational movement becoming self-aware at a local level. A pattern of relationships reflecting itself inwardly, not separate from the system, but one of its expressions. And because everything is relational, nothing on Earth ever exists in absolute isolation. Even the most solid-seeming object is held together by relationships between its parts. Atoms bound by forces, molecules structured by interaction, materials stabilized by internal balance. Remove the relationships, and the object no longer exists in its current form. So what appears as things are really stabilized patterns of relation, temporary configurations of interaction that persist long enough to be recognized, and then slowly transform again. This makes Earth feel less like a collection of objects and more like a continuous field of relationships expressing itself in different densities, sometimes dense enough to form solids, sometimes fluid enough to form oceans and air, sometimes dynamic enough to form living systems, sometimes reflective enough to form awareness, but always relational, always interconnected, always dependent on interaction to exist in any form at all. Even time, as it is experienced, is shaped by relation, because time is not directly observed, it is inferred through change. Without change, time has no experiential meaning. So change is what allows time to be perceived. And since everything on Earth is changing, everything participates in the perception of time, which means time itself is woven into the structure of Earth's processes, not separate from them, not external to them, but expressed through them as a measure of transformation. And transformation is everywhere. Even what appears still is undergoing slow transformation. Rock under pressure, ice under heat, cells under metabolic turnover. stars and distant space evolving across billions of years. Nothing is exempt from change. But change is not chaotic. It is structured by interaction, and that structure creates continuity. Continuity is what allows systems to persist without collapsing into randomness. It is the pattern beneath variation, the rhythm beneath fluctuation, the coherence beneath transformation. And Earth, at every scale, is a continuity of transformation, which means nothing here is ever truly separate from anything else for long, because separation is temporary arrangement, not permanent condition. And in that temporary arrangement, awareness arises, not outside the system, but within it, as one of its ongoing expressions, a localized concentration of experience within a distributed field of processes. And that experience does not need to capture the full system, because the system is already functioning without needing to be fully known. It does not depend on understanding to continue. It depends on interaction, and interaction continues regardless of awareness. So awareness is not the center of Earth. It is one of its reflections, a momentary perspective within a much larger unfolding. And as that unfolding continues, there is no need for final explanation, because nothing here is moving toward an endpoint. Everything is already in motion. Everything is already connected. Everything is already part of the same continuous system of Earth. And that system does not pause. It does not conclude. It does not resolve. It simply continues through cycles, through relationships, through transformation. And as thought becomes quieter again, even the sense of structure begins to dissolve gently into background awareness, not ending, not stopping, just softening, until what remains is only continuity itself, movement without separation, relationship without isolation, and Earth quietly, endlessly unfolding within itself,